Thank you for joining us for our Digital Health Commercialization Seminar Series, co-sponsored by the Brown Lifespan Center for Digital Health and Brown Technology Innovations. My name is Melissa Simon, and I'm a Business Development Director with Brown Tech Innovations, which is Brown's Technology Transfer Office. And I'll be one of your moderators today. In this seminar series, we're exploring the process of bringing digital health innovations to market. We've invited speakers over the course of the next month with expertise on intellectual property, regulatory pathways, market access, designing and evaluating digital health tools, and pitching a product. So whether you're someone ready to pursue commercialization or just considering the pathways for scaling your innovations, we hope you'll take away some valuable insights through this series. And to stay up to date on all of these sessions, we'll be adding a link to the email listserv in the chat. So for today's seminar, we'll be learning about regulatory strategy. So I'll let Allison introduce you to our guest speaker.
Thank you, Melissa, and hello, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Allison Seeley. I am the other moderator for this session. I am the education coordinator for the Brown Lifespan Center for Digital Health, where one of our strategic priorities is helping to develop the future of the digital health workforce through programming and events like the one that you are all joining today. For today's session, we're thrilled to welcome Dr. Shrawan Patel, who will be talking about U.S. regulatory landscape. Dr. Shrawan Patel is a recognized voice in the digital health ecosystem and has expertise ranging from the development of digital diagnostic products through to the implementation of health system-wide technology solutions. His background includes time practicing as a physician, building companies as an entrepreneur, and working with numerous healthcare companies on consulting projects. He currently serves as the Managing Director of Strategy Health, which is a boutique consulting firm focused on the digital health industry. He's currently working on a number of regulatory related projects, and we're happy to have him with us today to speak about U.S. regulatory pathways. The presentation will be between 40 to 45 minutes, and we'll have some time for you to test your knowledge throughout with polls and quizzes, and then we'll close with about 10 to 15 minutes for question and answer. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Patel.
Great. Well, it's lovely to be here. Just check I'm not on mute. All right. So yeah, lovely to be here. So just as a clarification, 40 minutes to cover regulatory pathways is, I think, quite a tall order. So for full transparency, I was saying to Alison, this presentation has been surprisingly tough. The regulatory space is complex, and this deck has kind of gone huge and then small. And I've had to draw a line somewhere. So I've kept it relatively focused around kind of my background and expertise. And so I hope it's useful. And if anyone wants to connect afterwards to delve into specific bits or areas, then please do get in touch. So about me, I focus mostly on digital health companies. My projects include running clinical studies, formulating FDA submissions, commercial planning. And so my focus is very much around software as a medical device, so software products as opposed to physical hardware products. And so this is the angle that I'm coming at. If you are working on hardware products, there is overlap, but there is also hardware specific nuance. There are some interactive elements to this presentation. There are going to be some kind of poll quizzes as we go through, just to try and get you guys doing something rather than just sitting listening to me. So start off with today's objectives. First of all, I'd like you all to walk away thinking that regulatory should be part of your thought process, even as you're coming up with ideas, as you're spotting problems. That regulatory does impact things down the road, and the sooner you start thinking about it, the easier life becomes. Next is I'm going to go through some very high-level overviews of some of the different regulatory buckets that digital health products can sit in. And hopefully that'll be a starting point for you guys to go away and read some documents and released by the FDA. And I have some materials that at the end, some resources that you can read to learn more. And then finally, that small variations in labeling, product, use case can alter the regulatory buckets in which a product sits. And so that's kind of a big reason why regulatory pathways, oversight should be part and parcel of your thinking, because your use case may change slightly to shift the regulatory bucket in which a product may fit. So to start off, I'm going to start with a quick poll just to see kind of where people's understanding is. Here are two devices. They're designed to amplify sound for the end user. That's kind of what these devices do. So are these regulated by the FDA as medical devices? Yes, no, maybe, not sure. All right, interesting. All right, I'm going to kind of crack on there. So just to give you guys an idea, we're going to come back to this question at the end. Hopefully the levels will change. So we had about a third of people said yes, they're hearing aids, so they're regulated as medical devices. About 50% of you said they could be, but you'll need to see the labels. And then about 15% of you said you don't know. All right, so 30%, 50%, and 14%. Drop that down. 30, 50, 15. All right. So going back to this idea around when to think about regulatory pathways, we all work in healthcare, it's highly regulated. So we know that regulation is something that we will have to face, we're likely to face when coming up with a product that we hope someone within the healthcare space is going to use. So I think it's important to reassess when we actually start thinking about regulation. I say that because it's a mistake that I see fairly often. The typical process that most people go through is that they identify a problem. They then design a solution, and the design of the solution is very focused around filling the problem. Every little bit of the problem you can solve, you design the solution to fill it. You then begin to build. You test the product, usually kind of in a small scale within maybe your health system, within your research group, whatever it might be. And then you think about scaling. Regulatory considerations tend to occur in the latter part of this process. Ideally, you should be thinking about it all the way through, from problem identification through to design of the solution through to building the MVP. You should constantly be thinking about which regulatory pathways or buckets the product might fit in. So why that's actually important is, first of all, company development. Regulatory oversight is time-consuming, expensive, and so just from developing a product into a commercial product is going to require you to actually think about what the timelines are, what the costs are, how big this company could be, etc. You need to think about design and development controls. So a QMS, which is a quality management system, is a system that you put in place to make sure that all your processes function as intended, and that you have a system in place to manage and oversee the production of your product. That's important, and we'll get to that later on. And then finally, you need to start thinking about your actual use cases. So who will use your product? How will they use it? And quite importantly, who's going to pay for your product? Regulatory impacts all three of these things. And so you need to start thinking about it early. All right, so that's a very quick kind of 5-minute, 6-minute overview of why you need to think about regulatory. So hopefully I've at least tackled the first objective. So the second objective, which is the big meat of this presentation, is is a high-level overview of the regulatory pathways out there. So who regulates medical products? So there are actually two agencies that oversee the regulation of products used for health. I see the spelling mistake. the easy way to think about these two organizations, so you have the FDA on the left, and then you have the Consumer Product Safety Commission on the right. Consumer Product Safety Commission oversees consumer-facing products that don't have medical device definitions. So medical device equals FDA oversight, non-medical device equals Consumer Product Safety Commission oversight. FYI, nothing in regulatory is simple or easy or black and white. There is overlap between both of these organizations. And even if a device isn't classified as a medical device, the way the language is written by the FDA, excuse me, means that actually it may not be a device, but still enforced, or the FDA may enforce regulation on your product. All right, so sticking with the FDA, because actually most products are going to be regulated by the FDA if they're being used in healthcare. So it's relatively rare that a product used in healthcare is only overseen by the Consumer Protection Agency. So I'm going to apologize in advance. Regulatory is not simple. There is a huge amount of dense text that you need to go through. And so a lot of these slides are pretty dense. I've tried to do my best to break them down in a way that'll make it easy for you. Hopefully I've been relatively successful. So section 201H of the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act is what defined a medical device. So pre-software, that was medical devices that were hardware, you know, a Zimmer walker frame or a sling for a broken arm, right? These were things that were defined as medical devices. Software has come along and has been planted into the same bucket. And so the original FDCA section 201H defines a product that is a medical device as one that's intended for use in the diagnosis of disease or other conditions, or in the cure, mitigation, treatment, or prevention of a disease. Also, something that is going to structurally affect the function of a man or an animal. This, funnily enough, is how you actually see things emphasized in most slides that talk about section 201H. How I think you should actually read it is any article which is intended for the use of diagnosis of disease, prevention, treatment, mitigation, etc. Intended to affect the structure or function. It's all about the intent. So the intended use of a product is what will define whether or not it's classified or considered a medical device under the FDA's definition. So the intention is different and is distinct from the actual operational design of the product. So that's important. Intention of how you plan on using a product is a really key thing. So medical devices. 201H kind of helps lay the groundwork for the three classes of medical device as defined by the FDA. Class 1 devices. Low risk, they're subject to general controls, which is something I'll get to in a second. And most class 1 devices are exempt from pre-market notification. The pre-market notification is a whole other area that we could spend, hours and hours talking about. But essentially, pre-market notification is notifying the FDA that you plan on marketing the device before you actually do it. So basically getting an approval or a clearance from the FDA for your product. Most class 1 devices don't require that. You can just start marketing them. Class 2, higher risk than class 1, but lower risk than class 3. Ambiguous, I know, but that is how it's defined. Class 2 devices are subject to general controls and special controls. Part of special controls mean that they require, Class 2 devices require pre-market notification. So this is now where you have a product, you've come up with it, you've designed it, you've tested it, you want to start marketing, but you cannot market it until you've gone to the FDA and asked for permission to market your product. Only once the FDA says, yes, you're good to go, can you actually start selling it and pushing it out into the wide world. Finally, class 3, highest risk to patients, usually life-supporting or sustaining tools, devices. They're also subject to general controls and special controls and require pre-notification, very similar to class 2 devices. So those are the 3 categories of device. I mentioned general and special controls. So very quickly on what I mean by that. All medical devices are required to conform to general control. So some class 1 devices and all class 2 devices and 3 devices are required to conform to special controls. So you have general controls on one side, special controls on the other. Everyone needs to conform to general. Class 2, 3, and some class 1 need to conform to the special controls. What are these controls? What do I mean by that? In essence, general controls are a set of requirements that guide product developers on how to address alteration to products, how to address branding and misbranding, how to register your device, about internal record keeping, about following good manufacturing practices. These things actually, even though they're required by the FDA, should probably be part and parcel of product development, full stop. I think it's just general good practice to have all of these things in place, even if your product ends up not technically being a medical device. Special controls are a level above, so increased performance standards and an assessment of performance standards, having post-market surveillance abilities and plans in place, and then doing the pre-market, so letting the FDA know that you're going to or you plan, hopefully, to start marketing your device. So all of this is the original kind of definitions of medical device. If you read Section 201H, how the FDA is, or how it's defined, product that's intended for use of the diagnosis of a disease or conditions and the cure, mitigation, treatment, prevention of disease. The mitigation and the prevention of disease is actually really broad. You know, a lot of the apps that we see on the App Store are part and parcel, or they will market themselves as helping to mitigate a particular disease state. So how do they get away with it? You know, what's happened since that original FDCA legislation to the modern day now? So the 21st Century Cures Act was enacted in 2016. And part and parcel of that was to allow for better resource utilization by the FDA. Basically, the FDA didn't need to oversee everything and anything that met the medical device definition. So to provide clarity to industry, so people like yourselves, me, etc., around what is and what isn't a medical device, the 21st Century Cures Act came in place. And it included this section, the 3060A, that has a subsection 5200, which clarified the fact that some software functions would no longer be defined as regulated medical devices. So what it actually says is that functions intended for, or part of what it says in relation to general wellness, is functions intended to maintain or encourage a healthy lifestyle that isn't related to the diagnosis, cure, etc., of a disease or condition, will now be classified as general wellness and won't be regulated by the FDA as devices. So in effect, your product may fall within the original definition of a medical device, but the FDA does not intend to actively exercise regulatory authority. So these are now wellness devices. These are devices like your weight loss apps that help you track your calorie intake. So you have an app, it's tracking your calories, you input how many calories you're eating, and it gives you a big thumbs up when you have fewer calories, when you have increased exercise. And what it will tell you is that by tracking your calories and by increasing your exercise, you will reduce your weight. And if you reduce your weight, your type 2 diabetes control may get better. These are general wellness categories that are well defined in the scientific literature. So, where didn't it go next? All right, there we go. The other part of section 5200 is that it created this category of clinical decision support software. So these were also excluded from the medical device designation as long as the following were true. So these tools aren't meant to acquire, process, or analyze images or signals from signal acquisition systems. So these are other medical devices. They should display, analyze, or display the analysis or medical information of a patient or other medical information. They should support recommendations to a healthcare professional. And then healthcare professionals should be able to independently review the basis of any recommendation. So if a tool comes up with a recommendation because, I don't know, let's say that you have a patient let's say a calculator, right? So a calculator that comes up with a risk scoring for stroke based off scientific literature would have a defined way of coming up with its recommendation that there is a 20% chance of stroke within the next 5 years for this particular patient. So a healthcare professional could go through the data, the basis of that recommendation, and independently review it. That would fall under this, and therefore that tool would be a clinical decision support tool. Okay, we're getting to the end, I promise. Clinical decision support, final couple of things. So there are 4 categories: non-device clinical decision support, low-risk device clinical decision support, device functions, and then non-clinical device functions that the FDA still intends to focus as regulatory oversight. I don't know if you noticed, but I'm actually now partially overlapping, going against some of what I've said before. This is part of the reason why regulatory is so complicated, why there is so much gray, and why regulatory lawyers make a lot of money. The FDA intends to use factors from the International Medical Device Regulators Forum. So the IMDRF put together this framework in 2016. It's actually really, really good. I think all of you guys, if you're interested in medical devices and how to think about risk, should read this document. And it puts together a really nice framework to help you weigh the clinical risks of different software products. So those risks in a nice tabular format look very similar to this. So in the bottom left, you have your category 1, so they're non-serious and they only inform clinical management, right through to kind of critical functions where it is treating a critical healthcare situation and it's treating or diagnosing a patient. This is how the FDA factors in risk, and this feeds into what a low risk CDS function is and what a CDS function that the FDA will oversee, will enforce. this table is kind of part and parcel of how you figure out where your product fits. All right, so in summary, you kind of have three general categories, or three categories that I think are going to be interesting or useful for you guys to know about: medical devices, general wellness, and clinical decision support. Clinical decision support tends to be fairly separate. Usually if you come up with a product that fits in CDS, it kind of stays within that CDS. And so what you end up doing is actually moving up and down these four categories based on how you design the product. Medical device and general wellness, and then medical apps come into this as well, but I've chosen quite specifically to kind of ignore those for now. But all of those fit very closely together. There's a lot of overlap. And so you can very quickly and easily move from general wellness category into medical device and then back down to general wellness, depending on how you label a product, how the product gets used, in other words, what the use cases are, what the risk of harm to patients is, and how that information will get used within a clinical picture. So how long have I been? About 15 minutes, 20 minutes. Hopefully now you kind of have a high-level overview of the different regulatory pathways that are available for digital health products. Now, hopefully, we'll have time to run through some use cases or some cases, and there'll be a bit of interaction now, finally. And hopefully this will also help you understand that as you think through products and ideas and how to solve problems, minor changes can move you up and down kind of or into and out of different regulatory buckets. So hopefully this will all tie it together. So the first case, let's say, so imagine you're a dietitian. You see patients following bowel surgery. So these are patients who have had, say, a bowel cancer that has been resected. And whilst the bowel is healing, these patients still need to get nutrition. And so you provide and you oversee total parenteral nutrition, so TPN. So this is food that goes into someone's vein to help sustain them. So you come up with these packets that you put, each day, each morning, and that feeds the patient during the day. They've also just gone through a huge surgery. And so infections happen. So you're on the ward and you see that there are delays in increasing calorie and protein contents when patients start to get infections. So as a dietitian, you see someone in the morning and they're fine. By the afternoon, they now have an infection, or one of the doctors has spotted that there's an infection brewing, and no one tells the dietitian, or the dietitian doesn't know until the next morning. So you think, great, there's a problem. This is going to be better patient care. We're going to get patients out the hospital quicker, which means that the hospital is going to save money. So I'm going to come up with a tool to highlight patients on TPN who've now just received an active infection noted on their patient chart. So we're going to send a message to the dietitians to review and maybe alter the TPN. What is this tool classified as? Medical device, general wellness product, or clinical decision support? Hopefully this is easy. I'm starting off easy. All right, as they're coming in. All right, perfect. Most of you answered. So it's 80% of you said clinical decision support. That's correct. So obviously there is a lot more that kind of fine print that you'd need to run through. But based on this information, you'd be fairly sure that it's an active infection that's noted in the patient chart. So the tool itself is not coming up with the infection notification. The Epic system has been notified, or an entry in Epic within the patient record has said this patient now has early signs of sepsis or has a urinary tract infection. That is what's informing the tool, and is a clinical decision support software, because now the dietitians can access that information and see patients earlier. All right, so it works. You put it into action. You now decide that you want to improve it. So you're going to pull real-time heart monitor data, respiratory data, so general observations, blood results. You're going to feed that into a machine learning algorithm to highlight patients who are likely to have new infection. So now, these are patients that are post-bowel surgery. They have, let's say, increased respiratory rate, increased heart rate, slightly increased temperature. Their blood results have altered slightly, so their white blood cells have increased. Machine learning algorithm is now taking all that information in and is going to let the dietitian know that this patient probably has new infection, therefore go see them, because their TPN needs to be altered. Now, medical device, general wellness product, or clinical decision support? What do you guys think now? I'll give it a couple more. All right, we'll call it there. So we actually have a 50-50 split between people thinking it's a medical device versus still clinical decision support. So I agree that there is still, with this one, there is more gray, but there are a few things. First thing is that it's pulling in information that is from a, let me pull up this. So it's here. Number one. So to be excluded from the medical device definition and purely be a non-regulated clinical decision support, part one is it needs to not acquire, process, or analyze a medical image or a signal. And so in this new iteration of the product, it's pulling in signals from medical devices, heart monitor data in particular, and blood results actually. Second thing is that it's feeding into a machine learning algorithm as opposed to a standard calculator. So only using respiratory rate, blood results, heart monitor data, and saying if thresholds are met, then it'll trigger a notification. In this case, you're doing some data to learn which patients are likely to become infectious, to get an infection, and which aren't. And so that now begins to increase the element of unexplainability. So again, going back to clinical decision support, number 4 is its intended purpose enables healthcare professionals to independently review the basis of recommendations. So granted, a healthcare professional could look at this patient and say, yes, I agree, there probably is an infection. The information that's fed into the machine learning algorithm may not be independently reviewable. The physician might be making decisions based on an alternative thought process. And so that takes it away from part 4. So now it isn't a pure clinical decision support tool, and probably would shift into a medical device classification by way of these improvements. So next case, How are we doing on time? Cool. So next case, say that you're a pulmonologist that runs an asthma clinic for newly diagnosed asthma patients. This is very common. Patients, particularly who are newly diagnosed, don't really understand how their medications work or even how to take them correctly. I've seen people use inhalers like they would a what do you call it? Perfume. True story. So this is the problem. So to correct it, you decide that actually this would be really good for the hospital because let's say the hospital is in the Bronx in New York, which has one of the highest rates of adult asthma anywhere in the country. So we're going to come up with a mobile app and we're going to put together some videos, some written information to help people understand the difference between rescue inhaler, between steroid inhalers. We're also going to put in a diary so that they can log their symptoms. They can do an asthma control test, which we can review in the clinic. And then based on how the asthma control test is functioning, the app can say, you know, you're doing really well. Your lung health is good. So this tool, would it be a medical device, general wellness, or clinical decision support? What do you guys think? Another easy one, I think. I'll give it another couple. Okay, great. Most of you said general wellness, which I would tend to agree with you in this case. Two of you did say clinical decision support, which, funnily enough, this product would overlap into clinical decision support. CDS systems don't have to be only clinician facing. CDS systems can be patient facing. And the diary elements and the symptom review, you could potentially argue might fall under a CDS. The reason why it also may not is because CDS is around making decisions, or there is some decision element to it. As described here, the app only offers words of encouragement to maintain what you're currently doing, which is a recommendation, but is an affirmative recommendation. You aren't saying to maintain a particular course of treatment, just that as things stand, you're doing good, you're doing well. Medical device, right as it stands, this probably wouldn't fall under a medical device designation as described here, because you are only providing general information. Diaries and symptom assessments don't tend to fall into the medical device designation category, but do fall into the general wellness because you're talking about respiratory health. You aren't actually talking about asthma, or asthma hasn't been mentioned in this description, though the ACT probably does have the words asthma within the questions. I think it's a bit semantic. So general wellness products. So now, app's well received. So it's being used within the clinic by patients. And anecdotally, you've heard from your ED physician friends, that there seem to be far fewer patients coming in for asthma exacerbations. This is great. You know, this is really cool, because now your app is actually having a potential therapeutic effect. So to quantify that, you run a small study. You want to assess the outcome. You do a very small study. You do it through your internal review board, and you find the app does actually improve asthma control in patients. Your patients do improve their control. They do use their medications better, more efficiently. They understand how they work, etc. And so now, instead of referring to your patients in the app as having good or bad lung health, you want to actually say that your app helps with their asthma. And this would also potentially increase utilization of your app, because patients will tie it to their disease as opposed to general lung health. So now you want to start mentioning the word asthma and treating asthma or helping with asthma symptoms. So now that you plan on doing that, does it fall into a medical device, general wellness, or CDS? Give it a couple more. Okay, we'll close it there. All right, so we got a bit of a shift, slightly more of you saying it's a medical device versus a general wellness product. So I would class this now as shifting into the medical device bucket. The operative words for me, or the operative words actually, are improve and asthma. And now that you're laying claim to improvement of a disease state, that the app does work, that your study shows that it works, and it does improve asthma control, and patients do get a therapeutic effect. But just because your study shows that it's true, doesn't mean you can plonk the words into the app and lay claim that the app works. You can because the study says so, but by doing so, you also now shift the tool from being a general wellness tool, which the FDA is not going to enforce discretion, or is going to have enforcement discretion, so it's going to be pretty hands-off, to now a medical device that's laying claim to improving a disease. And as soon as you do that, the FDA will say this is a class 2 medical device, and therefore you need to conform to both general rules, but also special rules. So that is these. So general controls and special controls. As a wellness product, you definitely didn't need to conform to special controls, and you probably didn't have to conform. You won't have needed to conform to general controls either. The FDA will say that we're going to be hands off. But you should do. General controls are still there, and you should really, as just good practice, use them. My feeling would be that you'd shift into medical device. So now, final case, after which I can see Alison, we're getting close, so almost done. Final one, psychiatrist. So you've been treating patients in your clinic for insomnia for years, and you've come up with a cognitive behavioral therapy approach to treating insomnia. It's called CBTI. And this is your specific approach, and you find that it works better than other CBTI programs that are being used by other clinicians. So let's say your daughter says, this is really cool. You should maybe see if you can expand your practice. This is a really great program. You'll help lots of people. You should increase the number of patients you're seeing. There's just you, so you can't. And so you realize that actually you could digitize it, that actually CBTI, or the program you've developed, could be turned into a web app. Patients would come to your website and use your program because you would tell patients that it would treat their insomnia. Based on that description, medical device, general wellness, or clinical decision support? Ooh. Interesting. All right, we'll call it there because of time. So shift in the medical device bucket, or towards the medical device bucket. I agree. Operative words being treat insomnia. So on the website and in the program, the plan is to state that the program would treat insomnia, and it's a fully self-guided digital treatment. So it's a medical device that's being used by patients on a phone as a web app to treat their insomnia. So this would almost certainly be classified by the FDA as a medical device because of the claims that you're laying. So the label is that it's an insomnia treatment program that is digital. Could treat be argued? I'll get you to ask that question at the end. Let me quickly wrap up. All right, there we go. So you've just finished developing your web app. You've been told that it'll be a class 2 medical device. You haven't conformed to either general or special controls. So you spend the next 6 months putting together your general controls, because it's good to do. And you redesign the program slightly. It still delivers your CBTI insomnia treatment, but on the website and in the app, it no longer says anything about treating insomnia. The way you phrase it and the way you state its use is that it improves people that are having trouble sleeping. It improves sleep health and sleep hygiene in people who are having trouble sleeping. So you've reframed it a little around sleep health. So last one, medical device, general wellness, or clinical decision support. Cool, well, I think we have our answer. 10 out of 10 said general wellness product. So yeah, this would now fit into the general wellness bucket. It's still a treatment, but you aren't saying that it's a treatment, and how you label it is everything. You know, going back to that very first slide at the beginning here, right at the bottom, the intended use of a product is what will define whether it's considered a medical device. And that's distinct from its operational design, so the things on the back end. So now, final poll. Going back to this question. These two audio devices, audio amplifying devices, are they products, they're medical devices? No, maybe, or don't know? Do you have enough information to tell? All right, for time, we'll call it there. It's about 50-50 now from 30-50, which is good. So funnily enough, these are actually, they could be regulated by the FDA. Basically, you don't have enough information to tell. So there are these devices called personal sound amplification devices that's actually the product on the right. The product on the left is a hearing aid. How they're labeled, they're, for all intents and purposes, the same product on the inside. They're sound amplification devices, but the labeling is different. So the labeling for the product on the left says that it helps people who are hard of hearing. The product on the right says that it amplifies sound to improve your ability to hear quiet sounds, whatever it might be. And so the two devices inside look very similar, but the labels are different. And that changes whether or not they are medical devices or non-medical devices. So hopefully that shows that really small changes can make a difference between the regulatory bucket in which products sit. All right, so there are some resources. I think these three are good ones to read. Top one is that Medical Device Regulators Forum, so that framework for understanding risk. Then you have the new updated 21st Century Cures Act policies around wellness devices, medical apps, and clinical decision support. And then there's more information for mobile medical applications that I haven't had a chance to touch on today in that third document. So with that, I will close.
Thank you so much. We'll now open the floor if there are any other questions. I know there were a couple in the chat, but I think they were addressed for the most part as you went along. Anyone can type into the chat, or if you want to raise your virtual hand.
So I can quickly answer Kathleen's question. So don't we need clinical data to prove that it treats insomnia? Yes, you do. So let me find where it is. Oh, it's here. So special controls. One of the things for special controls is performance standards. And that performance standards is clinical efficacy. But remember that the FDA is not there to define the efficacy of a treatment. It's there to define the safety of a treatment. So for example, let's take hopefully this isn't a hot topic, but let's say the COVID vaccines that are out at the moment or have come out into the market under the EUA process. Most of the vaccines have efficacy rates in the 80% and above. Technically, the FDA requires a minimum efficacy of 50% for you to actually get approval for your vaccine. So if I were to come up with a new COVID vaccine and submit it to the FDA, and it only had 55% efficacy, it technically has efficacy good enough to meet the minimum requirements. But in this specific case, the FDA will think about the performance standards in comparison to what else is on the market. And what it'll say is that if you release your product that's 55% versus everyone else's 85, 90% products, people won't know that your product isn't as effective. And therefore, there is a safety risk that people who get your vaccine may not realize that they aren't quite as well protected against COVID. And so there, the FDA is taking performance standards into account for safety. But the FDA isn't there to actually say that the performance of your tool is good or not, if that makes sense. It does do that to a certain extent, but it isn't its primary function.
We have another question in the chat about medical image, assessing behavioral episode.
Could you say something about medical images, like video?
I was reading and then something else came in.
Behavioral episodes.
Yeah, assessing behavioral episodes or seizure by computer vision.
So clinical decision support tools, you could theoretically, let's say that you've got a program. So Viz AI is a company that has a device that looks at CT scans and will tell you whether or not there's been a, I can't remember if they rule out bleed or whether they rule in embolic stroke, but whichever way it is. Basically, you have two types of stroke, a bleed or a clot. The clot you can do something about, you thin the blood. But if you give a blood thinner to someone that has a big brain bleed, you're going to make the bleed worse. And so there is this big problem. Issue is that you need to give clot busting medication as quickly as possible. So you want to know ASAP so you can give the medication. you could theoretically argue that it's a clinical decision support, right? It's supporting and providing a recommendation saying, I think there is a clot, therefore give the medication. You can independently review it. You can look at the CT scan. Oops, you can look at the CT scan and say, yes, there is a clot. I've lost, there we go. But it doesn't meet part 1. So you're not meant to analyze medical images or signals. And so it would classify as a medical image. Therefore, it would fall under the medical device regulation, not under the clinical decision support. So a tool like that would be a class 2, most likely, medical device. I hope that makes sense. So Kelsey says, so if you have already been selling your device as a general wellness product, to change your claims are going to approval as a medical device, are there any issues, considerations to be able to get reimbursable payments for your product as a medical device? Yeah. So medical devices are different from drugs. If you have a drug that gets FDA approval, FDA approval, you automatically enter into a payment framework in which you can start to negotiate payment for your product. Medical devices, unfortunately, don't have that same advantage. That just getting a tick from the FDA means that you can now go out and sell it. You still need to figure out to whom you sell it and how you sell it, how much they pay for it, etc. So the reimbursable bit doesn't unfortunately fit. But can you go from wellness product to medical device? Yes. So that final CBTI program was actually, I took some inspiration from a company called Big Health, which has a product that is called Sleepio. Sleepio for a long time was marketed as a general wellness product. So it helped with sleep treatment, with sleep health, with sleep hygiene, etc. I don't know if they have yet received clearance or if they are going to receive clearance anytime soon. But I know that within their general roadmap, they will have used their general wellness tool to collect real-world evidence to be able to validate claims that their program treats insomnia. And so that'll then feed into their FDA submission for medical device designation as a medical device to treat insomnia. And so they've used their general wellness data and information to then get FDA approval as a medical device and lay claims to their program as a treatment for insomnia. What they've done is they've built their general wellness product with all the controls in place. All their general controls are there ready to go. It's now in their FDA submission that they meet the special controls, one of which is efficacy data, which they've gained from their general wellness device. Then based on assessment.
So I want to acknowledge the time. I know that it's 2 o'clock. Thank you so much for answering as many questions as we could get through. If you had questions that weren't able to get answered, feel free to reach out after the fact and we can see if we can arrange some responses. In the meantime, I want to say thank you to everyone who's been here, who joined us for this call today. Thank you to Dr. Patel for this great presentation. Please join us for our next one in a week from today. Register using the link in the chat. And then if you have a moment, we do appreciate feedback from everyone. So please help us out by completing the survey chatted. But I hope everyone has a great day. Recordings will be sent out via email after the fact. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thanks, guys. Have a good day.